Right. Hey everyone. Thanks for hopping into the weekly startup reality check hosted by the Traction Lab here. I'll be kicking us off solo. JDM will be joining shortly. He's leading a youth entrepreneurship program. We'll be stepping in just after the fact, but I'm really excited to dive into our pre-submitted questions. But as always, we are taking the live questions first. For those that are in the space, would love to hear what questions you're grappling with, as well as ultimately what you're working on. Before we hop in and kind of as Josh may find his way here, wanted to start by kicking off just a couple of announcements in the Traction Lab ecosystem here. So one is we do have applications open for the Traction Lab Investment Readiness Engine. This is a 9-month engagement with JDM and myself, and then also our investor ecosystem and our subject matter expert mentors that will be here to support you. But really, we focus on two core elements. The first being your customer acquisition engine. So really thinking about how you build a predictable, repeatable path to sales that will help you be that scalable startup that you envision. And in that process, building those foundations and the narrative that will then feed nicely into positioning you for investment readiness, which is the whole other element of the investment readiness engine. So we'll help you tackle things such as your data room, fine-tuning the deck based on feedback from investors. And that's not necessarily just in terms of polish. It's more about identifying what are the gaps that they're seeing in the venture and how we can ultimately systematically help you in accessing that support that you need. Basically how that works is we'll select about 12 to 15 companies. Then we'll be diving in throughout that 9 months and starting to kind of whittle down throughout the 9 months that will then position 4 to 6 companies for a $100,000 investment that our investor community will choose. And then the last one is we are accepting for our next cohort of the Traction Lab Venture School. So I'll throw those links in the chat. Nonetheless, appreciate you all being here. Going to spend a second here warming up the chat, but would love to hear what you all are working on, what questions you have. So thank you for joining, and let me know what you're working on. You are working on and what questions you have. All right. So here we go. Looks like I sufficiently filibustered for Jay Doom to join. Everyone, thanks for joining. We do prioritize the live questions first, and then we hop into the pre-submitted questions. But in terms of the pre-submitted questions, we did get, it looks like 3 or 4 questions. So I'll make sure J Doom has access to that here shortly. Overall, how we doing, J Dooms?
We're rocking and rolling, wheeling and dealing, and so forth.
Rocking and rolling. So how many teams we working with over there at the Connect Labs?
We got 4 high school teams. They're all fairly small teams, 3 or 4 people per team. They've got some cool ideas. We're gonna hear some pitches, in about 2 hours to the illustrious panel of judges, which of course includes you, good sir. And we have, we've got 3 physical products out of the 4 teams, which I wasn't expecting. And they're varying degrees of interesting. There's a different type of detachable camera for your phone, or camera lens for your phone, to replace, I guess, some of the quality issues that people find with the existing ones. There's a kind of car pad that I was going to say seat, but it's for children and adults. It sits on your seat that is supposed to be very comfortable and help you sleep in the car for those who have trouble with it. There is a team that is making a box in which you hide your cables that also is retractable. So if you are a gamer and you want to make your cables blend in a little bit to the natural ambiance of the setup that you have, then you can use their configurable boxes. And then the one software that we have is a platform to connect students with internship opportunities. So the one software platform is a marketplace, but 3 physical products. So I don't know. It's going to be fun. They're a fun group. It's awesome. But 3 physical products is like 1 click away from my comfort zone. So I'm getting stretched a little bit with that too. Having already been stretched, focusing on students, high school students. It's always a bit of an interesting and fun challenge to say, how do we take these concepts that we teach to adults and dial it back to a level that is not oversimplifying, but that's making more accessible some of those exact same concepts and ways of thinking about things. Where even I had one conversation where I wanted to show them something, and I had to start with, have you guys taken algebra? Because I needed to give them a simple formula. And if it's X times this, gives the whatever, and it's they don't know algebra, that's not going to make any sense. And of course they did, because they're all smart kids. But yeah, so that's where things are at. I can see I have access to the questions now, so I have filibustered in turn long enough for you to get that squared away.
All right. So as we kind of get rolling here again, just want to make sure those that are here live would love to have you throw your questions in the chat. We always like to prioritize the live ones, so I think just in getting started here, just making sure we have the right questions. So give us 1 second as we fine tune some of this. But so this first one, as we look at it, they're kind of in terms of, I guess, this venture, they are in the discovery phase, so they're fairly recently launched, and this is kind of what they've shared with us. So every discovery call goes great. They tell me the problem is real. They use it. A couple even asked about pricing. Then they send them a proposal, and they ultimately are getting ghosted. They've got 8 of these now. They're wondering what they're missing. So would be curious, Jay Doom, what's coming to mind for you here? So they're in the discovery phase. They, are getting some signs from customers in conversations that problem is real. But then there's the inevitable ghosting that's coming along with this.
I mean, I'll just connect this back to the podcast episode that drops tomorrow was the one that we recorded live last night at our very successful in-person recording of Science and Startups Live. So we recorded the podcast live and in person. You can see how that went on the episode that drops tomorrow. But one of the things that we talked about was the say-do gap. And, we're seeing a bit of that here, where we are asking them questions. They're telling us something, but it doesn't cost them anything to tell us something. It doesn't cost them time. It doesn't cost them social capital. It's completely free. It is consequence-free for them to just say positive things. And then when you layer on top of that the things that they say that might be more neutral can be interpreted by us due to our own cognitive biases as more positive than they actually are. So all of those things can basically combine together to create this miasma that we can't really see through to get at the truth. And so we need a tool that we can take off the shelf to actually be able to see through that miasma, to get something that's much more clear and focused. And so we use the team framework, right, which is time, effort, access, money. Those are the 4 things that you can ask for if you want to cross that say-do gap, the difference between what they say and what they'll do. Will they give you more time? Will they give you some effort? Will they put in some effort in? Will they give you access to somebody else? Will they give you money? And that could be an LOI, or it could be actual money or whatever. And so here, we're seeing the natural consequence of that. They're telling you that, oh, this is interesting, the problem's real, and you send out a proposal, meh. And this is all pretty much aligned with that. So not too surprised that we see that, because we didn't ask them anything to actually capture the difference between interest and intent. And there's a pretty big gulf between interest and intent. So I think that's where I would start with that. Maybe we could also like talk about why we might be seeing the gap, and in addition to just that there is the say do gap, why might we seeing the say do gap here? That's probably another angle. I don't know if I can go
Yeah.
there unless you want to tackle that.
For sure. Yeah, happy to dive into it. And thanks for bringing in the say do gap. And just for context, everyone, through a traction thinking article in the chat that speaks to moving those commitment to yeses and nos, and so using the team framework to close that gap. And I think the big thing that oftentimes I think founders don't always see is there's like certainly the fear of getting the no, right? You like put the ask out there for that intent and commitment, and ultimately drive some sort of decision. But the no can be just as good as the yes, because currently we don't have answers on why you're being ghosted. So you'd rather get the no and be able to move forward than have this kind of hope that, oh, well, maybe just something happened and this got put on the back burner, which makes me come into kind of the next element of maybe why we're seeing this ghosting happen, was maybe there is really a problem there. So they had these conversations. They said the problem is real. Maybe they said it's fairly severe, so it's something that has a big impact. But there's not this urgency to drive decision making now. And so we have the 2x2 quadrant that we often talk about, where we have severity on one side and urgency on the other. And the gold mine of problems we want to be solving have high urgency, high severity. And in this case, it sounds like they're only really focusing on potentially the severity elements, but there's a lack of urgency. And so when we send this proposal, they're like, I'll respond to it when it becomes a more urgent problem. And so one of the things we want to understand, and this is where when you use the say do gap, you can actually understand where they're at in the decision making process, and also are they the actual economic buyer of such a solution going forward. And so when we kind of just leave it in this like land of unknowns, we're not able to actually make a decision to go forward. We just have more questions related to like, do I need to do something different? Was it the email that I sent versus was there more of a foundational challenge, being that this customer did have a real problem, but it wasn't urgent enough to like go find a solution. They're not prioritizing it with their budget currently.
Well said. Well said.
Cool. We did get a note here in the chat. So thanks, Luciano, for joining us. So good to see you. Let's hop into it. Do you want me to read it or do you want to?
No, go ahead.
Cool. Hey, gents. Along the same thing here, I had to continue down that path, but just became aware of started reading the mom test. So we are very familiar with it. But to read your questions, are we familiar with it? If so, any thoughts on using it to do discovery on new ICP personas? If not, thoughts, pro tips on exploring pivot to new ICP persona. And so I'm going to tee up JDM to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. This is definitely a framework and a foundational methodology that we employ in our customer discovery work that we support founders with. In particular, we've actually, for our startup challenge, and I believe we can make accessible to all of you that are joining here, as well as in the Traction Lab community, a prompt that helps drive if your questions that you would be driving in your customer discovery past the mom test. So we actually have generated a prompt to help you kind of think through that and ultimately make sure that you're not biasing those questions going forward. So this is super, super valuable. The big output, and then I'm going to turn it over to JDM, was in terms of how we want to speak to kind of an actual tangible output that kind of starts to have a better proof point or stronger evidence, is what we say. It's a self-reported problem, and one that is self-reported in terms of urgency and severity. And so that's really fundamentally what the mom test brings in, is that we're not leading them to the answer that we want. We're eliciting stories that have them self-report that problem has high urgency and severity, and ultimately diving into us having stronger evidence to move from that discovery into validation. So JDooms, anything in particular? I know this is a framework you brought to me, and definitely has really helped in how we serve founders.
Yeah, so thanks for teaming me up there. So one of the things I actually want to call out is that the Rob Fitzpatrick book, The Mom Test, covers a lot more than the mom test. as odd as that is. But the central framework of the mom test, which I'll come back to in just a second and kind of explain there, is one of our foundational tools. But the book itself covers a pretty broad range of tools that you can use in that early stage discovery process. We don't leverage those necessarily as frameworks, but there's good stuff, as how you filter out certain kinds of qualitative data. So how do you separate out like compliments and fluff and things like that that you're getting out? There's all kinds of bad data, and how do you filter through those? And there's, I think, some thoughts in there about how you actually structure the interview conversation itself. So if you're unsure about like, where do I begin? And like, how do I engage in a conversation with the customers? They got stuff on there. I think probably some things on finding people to talk to. So there's a lot more that goes into that. But the core of it that we find super valuable as one of our core frameworks is the mom test itself. And so the mom test is this idea that you want to ask questions in a way that even your own mother has no choice but to tell you the truth. It's like the basic idea is you go to a restaurant and the waiter at the end of your thoroughly mediocre meal, it's not bad, but it's not good. You're not coming back unless your friends really want you, but you had a good time because you're with your friends, whatever. And like at the end of the day, they go, whoop, and they come over to you. The waiter comes over and says, "How was everything?" What do we say? It's fine. It's good. It's good. Right? Yeah, it's good. And like, there's an interesting like little thing that goes with that, because the waiter doesn't care unless you're at like a really fancy restaurant where it's like where the hospitality staff there are actually like the careers that people have. Unless we're doing that, that we know that they don't care, and they work on tips and all of that. And because they don't care, you'd think we would just tell them the truth. Like, what does it matter? But we still won't tell them the truth even though they don't care. And so like the key difference between them and your startup is that when you're talking to customers, they know you care. They're even less likely to tell you the truth. And we're lying to the freaking waiter about the food, right? And we're not even avoiding telling them it's bad. We're avoiding telling them it's mediocre. And so like the idea is, how do you ask questions in a way that even your own mother has no choice but to tell the truth? You can't say, "Hey mom, you like my startup idea?" She's gonna, "Yes, you're amazing. You're awesome. You're gonna be the next Mark Zuckerberg, or if your mother doesn't like you, the next Elon Musk. And don't forget about me when you're rich and famous. Don't forget about little old me." And so like that's not helpful. And that's because there's a gap between what she thinks you need to hear and what you actually need to hear. And that gap creates this room for misunderstanding, where she's not going to tell you the truth because there's a misalignment between the truth and what you need to hear. So you want to collapse that. And the only way to do that is to not ask subjective questions. So you don't ask these questions about the future. Would you ever? Do you like this? Would you buy this? How much would you pay for this? You can't ask those would questions, because we're going to get dishonesty out of it, because there's that gap between what she thinks you need to hear and what you want to hear. She wants to give you encouragement. She thinks that's what you need to hear. Instead, you can ask, "Hey, have you ever had this problem? Tell me about that. What was it like? What did you try? Why didn't that work? What were some of the costs or consequences of not having that?" You can go ask all of those questions, and there is no gap between what she thinks you need to hear and what you want to hear. Unless you bias the conversation by saying, "I'm working on X, now tell me about Y," then they have no reason to tell you anything other than the truth. And because of that, you're going to get far better information. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the mom test, that's the mom test. And I think, Cameron, you threw on the screen a bit ago, if anybody wants to know more about the mom test, or wants to just figure out how to apply this to something really specific without reading the whole book, then throw us a message, and we have a prompt that you could chuck right at Claude or chat, and with the questions that you're thinking about asking, and it will tell you if it passes the mom test or not, and it will provide some alternative ways that you can ask the question to get at what you're trying to ask. So hit us up if you want that. It's totally free. Anything to add to that?
No, I think that was robust, and yeah, appreciate you sharing more deeply about it. So I'm just wanting to make sure, again, if you want access to that, just make sure to DM us, and we'll get that to you. So awesome. I'm going to share another traction thinking article that has some components of the mom test. So maybe if you're willing to kick us off for the next question. I know you got the lights you have to keep going over there. So
Motion
um,
lights, yes. Motion sensor lights getting me. Yeah, I'll tee us up. All right, cool. So our next question. This is a B2B compliance SaaS with a live MVP. They're pre-seed. They've been live about 6 months. And they say, we build software that digitizes safety and compliance docs for mid-sized manufacturers. It replaces the binders and spreadsheets that they keep for OSHA audits. I've demoed it to about a dozen plant managers. Everyone says the manual process is a nightmare and they'd use ours. And 3 ask for pricing, but every proposal stalls. Nobody says no, nobody signs. What's the move to get them over the line? Well, this is actually remarkably similar to the one we just got. Like this goes to show, like a lot of times we talk about this, we pick for the easy examples, and like the easy examples are actually doing this customer interview question, and people say it's awesome, and then you get down the line, it doesn't convert, and you're like So it's an easy example, and then we lead a lot of founders to thinking that like we're not talking to them because we're picking this example because it was easiest and just happened to be early stage, and all of these problems are the same at the entire life cycle of a startup. And like the exact analog of the first question is something that companies farther along have when they're asking about new features. So they can ask customers about new features to apps to see if it would make it more valuable or increase the retention or increase the amount that they're able to charge, a new pricing tier or whatever. And you're open to the same biases, even though you're a really well-established company. So it's not unique to the early stage. And this is one where we're seeing the exact same effects, but with a company that's further along. We didn't give them any reason to tell us the truth. And so there was that gap between what we needed to hear and what they think we needed to hear. And so like you demoed it to them and you had a conversation with them and they agreed with everything that you say, but they didn't end up convert. And so we're right back to severity and urgency. Like it just probably, even if the problem is severe, which I don't think we can conclude based on the data you've given us, maybe you can conclude it from yours, but we certainly can't conclude it from the 2 sentences you gave us. But the urgency obviously isn't there, either. So even if you have severity, you don't have urgency. Without severity and urgency, you're kind of stuck. I actually have I drew on the board for students the other day. Can we see in there? Yeah, like you can see all the way on this back wall here. Like you can draw this matrix here. We have urgency on one axis, then you have severity on the other axis, and then all the way up here, this is the zone you want to be in. It's a skull and crossbones because I have the other diagram in there as well. But like the skull and crossbones, like that's where we're going for problems that are really severe and really urgent. And if you're targeting a problem that's in that other, like that upper left side, where it's really severe but not very urgent, then you get a lot of false signals because everything seemed good. Like you go and talk to them and they're like, oh gosh, yeah, that problem sucks, man. Like I wish I'd pay money to solve this problem. Like this would be really cool if we could just solve this problem. And then when you go to convert them on it, they're like, I'll get back to you, or they ghost you, or they whatever, because it was a severe problem. It just wasn't on the top of their list. And like we end up biasing the whole thing toward the problem that we're trying to validate. And that bias causes us to miss the context in which that problem sits. And that context is the rest of the priority stack, where this is now, even though we thought it was a really severe and urgent problem, it ends up being problem number 6 on their list, and nobody pays to solve it. I don't know if you want to take it in a different direction, Cameron, but I just wanted to connect those dots together.
No, I think that was awesome, and I was going to say ditto to the prior one because it seemed very very similar, and not to not give that a proper answer in terms of I think we sufficiently kind of tackled a similar pain point on the prior question. So again, appreciate those questions coming in. We did get a follow-up kind of note from Luciano here that we can bring up, and then I think we have maybe 1 or 2 more questions, but one, just appreciate you guys being here, and just following up on Luciano's was the chaos of startups. So for sure, especially in the discovery, there's a lot of ambiguity, unknowns that you're exploring. And so currently, just reading out here, exploring pivots to new ICP persona. So struggling with the best way to do that, and while managing existing previous momentum. And so I think this kind of points back to some of the things that we've been talking about. And so I think oftentimes people say this is like who we're targeting, but the grounding effort is the problem and the jobs to be done, right? And so understanding those core elements and contextualizing it all back to, is there an urgent and severe problem, and is there a set of patterns that we're seeing? And so the new kind of framework that I want to bring in, not necessarily new in terms of we created it, but the way to be thinking about it is we want to define negative space. So oftentimes we're looking for the answer of, yes, this is who we're narrowing in on. But in part of that process is saying these are actually not people who have an urgent, severe problem. And so as you're going through this discovery work, it's not how do I go talk to 50 people and just try to, pull a pattern out from there. Is like, okay, let's go talk to 10 people that we believe is this customer persona that we want to get a hold of. And then understand, okay, there's 3 of these 10 that have some urgency and severity around that particular problem. So we realize we've removed those other 7 people, and why are they different than those 3? Now let's go try to find 10 people that have a similar pain point like those 3. And so then we go have another 10 conversations, and maybe now we're up to 6 of the 10 have that problem. And so now we're getting more nuanced in the way that we can identify who that particular person is. And then we go into saying, okay, now let's find the next 10 that look like those 6. And now you have a higher probability of not only finding them, but you have greater clarity on exactly what that persona is. Because at the end of the day, if you're just kind of on paper putting, here's what the persona is, that's all based on assumptions that need to be tested in the real marketplace. And so those would be really foundational elements. And so want to give you that permission to say, like, define negative space. Go find the people that are not those customers, so then you don't talk to them. You find the 1 or 2 that initially have that urgency and severity, and then why are they different than the others? And I think the last point that I'll add and see what JDM has to offer here was the key thing is like the triggering event will be very similar. So that both that urgency and severity usually happens when something like an event takes place. And so that's usually especially where that urgency clicks in. And so when does that happen, and what's the common pattern amongst a set of people of when that takes place? Because maybe there are people who see that severity, but it doesn't become number 3 until this thing happens. But that might be the common pattern that you recognize is when this particular event happens, now they're actively looking in the market and looking for solutions. So those would be some of the ways that we could whittle down. And again, you're only looking for 16% of the market, right? We're not trying to find everyone in the world. It's ultimately this small set of early adopters that we're trying to get in front of.
Rock solid. All right. We did get another question in the chat. So this one here was a question about, this was a question. Sorry, I was just letting people know they can, you can come in. Just letting people know they can come in the classroom, even though I'm on the internet on a live stream right now, but you guys can certainly come in. Yeah, we have office hours every Friday on yeah, well, I talked about you guys just a minute ago, so but we only have about 15 minutes left. So sorry, I'm going to be making noise, but you guys are more than welcome to be in here and everything. So and do your work. Okay, so the question from Jeremy was about hiring internal or outsourcing fractional SDR or BDR. Okay, that's a very specific question that I don't think I have enough context about your business to answer. But like, quick thing, like for those who aren't familiar, it's a sales development rep or a business development rep, and they're oftentimes used interchangeably, but a business development rep is usually somebody who like goes outside the business to like find new customers, and a sales development rep is often somebody who's just taking like inbound stuff. So that's what those are. If you're in a really early stage startup, you shouldn't be hiring internal or outsourcing SDR or BDR, because you just don't have enough data for it yet. Until you can really prove that you have like a repeatable motion, to me, it does not make sense to try to hire somebody to do that role. We have this founder arc that we talk about at the Traction Lab, which is every competency that's within inside a startup goes through this process of being completely founder only. So one of the founders is doing every single thing in the company. And then over time, as things become predictable, you can bring in help that's not the founders that can actually do some of those jobs. And then it becomes founder led. So the founder can't get out of the picture yet, but you could start handing that off with supervision. And then once it becomes totally predictable and totally repeatable and boring to have the founder involved in it at all, just a waste of their time, then it can be founder less, right? So it's just founder only, founder led to founder less. And every single competency in the company goes through that at some point in time. So when you're talking about like sales, if you can't, the first sales are always going to be done by the founder. And until they become predictable and repeatable, you like hiring even a fractional SDR or BDR is probably going to lead to some chaos, and probably going to lead to a lot of wasted capital and some pretty poor results from that. So, but if you're much further along, then the internal versus outsource or fractional is really just an economics question at that point. So I don't know if you have anything to add on to that, Cameron.
No, that's why through our recent Zero to or Traction Lab podcast episode, where we talk about the founder arc, and we call it like, have you earned the right to delegate in that process? And so the biggest thing is understanding that you as a founder have the ability to make decisions that a salesperson can't. And oftentimes we're not at that point of really having predictability and repeatability yet to ultimately get to that point. So would love for you to give that a listen. And, if you have further questions, comment on the Traction Lab podcast on our Substack, and we'll answer those questions as you have them. But I think that's a great segue actually into the next question that was submitted. I'll read it and then we can see where we're at. Cool. So this is a direct-to-consumer subscription. They're at the seed stage. They have 5 paying customers through mixed channels. So we sell a subscription box for specialty coffee. So this is right in JDM's vein. Maybe you're one of the paying customers. Maybe you get a banana co-ferment subscription box. I'm just kidding.
Never living that down, am I?
They've landed 5 paying customers or subscribers, 1 from Instagram, 1 from a friend's referral, 2 from a local pop-up, and 1 from Reddit. It's working, and I want to put real money behind acquisition now. How much should we be spending to scale? So, Jay Doom, what comes to mind outside of where did you buy it through Reddit or what channel? Or not, just kidding.
I don't know if you heard, they said specialty coffee, but they did not say it was banana co-fermented. So
well,
I don't know.
I mean, you didn't necessarily sign up for the banana co-ferment, but that was your favorite one.
It was not my favorite. Okay, that was very interesting coffee to have one time. All right, that's all that is. Okay, so the question here is like, how much should we be spending to scale? It's the wrong question to ask because you haven't earned scale yet. So you've said that like you've got 5 paying customers, which is awesome. So great job on getting 5 paying customers, but they're all coming from different places. Like you got 1 from Instagram and 1 from a friend, 2 from a local pop-up. That was a good idea, by the way, doing a local pop-up. So kudos for that. And then 1 from like a Reddit thread. So they're all coming from everywhere. So like, what are you going to scale? Like, are you going to put the money into Reddit, or are you going to put the money into the pop-up? Are you going to put the money into Instagram? Like you have all these like single data points with nothing connecting them together. And so I don't know what you're going to spend money on. Like you have to earn scale. And so the idea is that you want to focus on how you go from predictable to repeatable to scalable, right? So in order for something to be scalable, it has to be repeatable. Otherwise there's nothing to scale. In order for it to be repeatable, it has to be predictable. You have 5 independent data points. So you have nothing that's actually even close to predictable. So I don't think you've earned scale yet. I wouldn't ask that question. I would ask the question like where can we put our resources to try to find a predictable path to growth?
For sure.
What do you think?
So, yeah, I think the only 100% agree. And thanks for diving into kind of how we think about like scaling. You have to be first predictable, and then that goes into repeatability, and then that repeatability ultimately is where you get to scale. And so you have to give yourself that permission where it's not like you just have 5 paying customers. Now, how do I throw a bunch of money at marketing and sales to scale it? Because all 5 of those are very different channels. The acquisition costs are going to be different. And ultimately, like potentially those are even 5 different customers in terms of why they purchased it to begin with in that space, right? So we don't have a true clarity on what that looks like. And when we particularly are thinking of scale, that's where unit economics come in big time. And so we don't really understand what that's going to look like because we haven't really been intentional around a particular channel. And so Two things I wanted to add in was we talk about kind of channel hacking or growth hacking, is where you really are looking at all of your potential channels and what's a channel that one is easy to ultimately start to implement and go to market with, but then also on the other axis has a high level or high amount of those customers that you're ultimately targeting. And so we want to ultimately start our efforts in those particular channels. So across those five, say, Reddit, is that like a large channel for, specialty coffee? I'm not sure. I'm not on Reddit a lot, but I don't necessarily would think that would have many customers. It might be an easy place to ultimately start to tackle, but it doesn't necessarily have the return on investment for your time. And so when we're thinking about building that predictability, was like, okay, we know we can easily get in front of customers, and there's a lot of them in this space, and so that helps drive effective cost to acquire customer, and is foundational for our unit economics. Were you going to say something? Looked like you were going to.
No, I was just going to say, getting close to the end of the time that I have allotted here before I have to get back to like the real world.
Yes, and there was one other thing I was going to say, but I don't remember it now.
Sorry, I thought you were
No, it
done, and
was
I was trying to.
the channel hacking and predictable repeat. Oh, the last thing I will say was the strength of evidence. So one of the we have the strength of evidence matrix that we talk about. And again, if you want any of these tools, DM us, and happy to share them. But the one that stands out here was like a friend's referral, and from a local pop-up shop. And so some of these where it's like not necessarily like it's strong in terms of like you have paying customers, so awesome, kudos, way to go there. But in terms of the way in which they became a customer, was there still was high proximity to you, and not necessarily where there's kind of cold outreach on some of these channels. And so want to look at how we build that process, because those that are both a high level of evidence, so paying customers, to then a cold outreach, is the best way to have some of those channels going forward. So with that, I think that those were our submitted questions. And I think we're kind of there to wrap up. So any last thoughts before we call it a day?
No, I think that was well answered. So thanks for everyone who asked a question live. We always like to prioritize those, but if you do want the more breathing room of the longer form and you want to send it in advance, then you can go to tractionlab.io, and there's a place to submit the questions there. But we do always prioritize the live ones. We love when you guys show up in person here. So thanks so much for doing that, and for bearing with us cutting a little bit short today, as Cameron and I have other places that we unfortunately have to be, but still wanted to make sure we did our weekly office hours. And, Cameron, thanks for getting things started while I was detained.
Of course, my pleasure. Well, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate the engagement, both those that submitted questions ahead of time, those that came live and asked questions, and also those that were here in the space learning through other founders. So we really appreciate the vulnerability and sharing what you're working on, challenges that you're experiencing. We hope we can give you that click forward you need. And if you know someone else that could get value from these weekly office hours, please do share these types of resources spread by word of mouth. So we appreciate you doing so. Lastly, as we shared a bunch of links in the chat, so feel free to check out all of those resources. There's no paywall for our podcast or our traction thinking articles, so access that content. And last thing I would say is feel free to reach out if you want that prompt as well through a direct DM to us. So with that, thank you all, and have a great